Okay. So we had 3 points of inquiry on the table. What was Baldwin doing with the song that Jesse had in his head throughout the story? What is the significance of Jesse's childhood homeboy Otis? And what stood out to you most about Baldwin's writing style? Who would like to start off the conversation?
In our breakout room, we were like talking about the song a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and I noticed that like the song was talking about the River of Jordan, and because like I'm like Catholic and stuff, so like we've talked about like the Jordan River before with like Jesus being baptized. So I think like the water, it's like symbol of like purity and cleansing. But in the case of Jesse, like the way he interprets it, the song now is like he said something like it was about how like it wasn't the African people trying to bring other black people to heaven. It was about bringing white people to hell or something like that. So like it's just like the perception of like his interpretation of the song now has changed since the event.
Yeah, very, very astute call out, Ashton. Thank you for that. Did anybody's group discuss the role of Otis in the story? Jesse's childhood friend? And again, he's not in the story per se, but he has a very predominant role in the story. Was that talked about in any of the breakout groups? Or did anyone discuss what stood out most about the writing style of James Baldwin? Was that conversation had?
So what I thought about it was that it was some his writing style is very like it just has like this kind of like a rhyme
Hmm.
to it, and yeah, that's kind of what I thought about it.
Okay. So there's a rhythm to his writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Definitely. Dope. So I do ask that you guys get a pencil and paper handy because I'm going to provide you with your last theoretical framework. And again, you would have to use the, excuse me, the wind blew my door. You have to use these for your midterm. So I do want you guys to familiarize yourself with it. We know that your first theoretical framework is African American male theory, which states African people are resistant and resilient with innate capacity for brilliance. Your second theoretical framework is funds of knowledge, which states that knowledge is passed down that is often unrecognized by the dominant society, that allows cultures to understand their uniqueness and allows cultures to understand their place in the world. That's funds of knowledge. The final theoretical framework comes from critical race theory. So the theory is critical race theory. The framework is counter storytelling. Again, this theory is critical race theory, CRT. The framework is counter storytelling. What counter storytelling is telling the stories from the vantage point of the marginalized, of the oppressed, of the downtrodden. Right? So if we're going to tell the story of America's discovery, we're not going to focus on Christopher Columbus' version of the story. We're going to focus on the indigenous and the African people that were here in the Americas prior to Columbus's arrival, right? So this is the counter story. If we're going to tell the story of the protests that happened over 2 summers ago with George Floyd, we're not going to tell that story from the lens of the business owners, of the police, of the mayor, etc. We're going to tell that story from the vantage point, from the lens of those who were in the streets protesting, right? So again, it's focusing on the story not of the dominant society, but of the society that often gets marginalized and unrecognized. That's this notion of the counter storytelling. Okay, so those are our three frameworks for the semester. We'll spend a little bit more time on those as we get closer to our midterm. Um, okay, so we're dealing with James Baldwin. And we're dealing with James Baldwin's book, Going to Meet the Man, which is a collection of short stories. The final short story is the one which you read, Going to Meet the Man. This was published in 1965. So you want to always to keep in mind when this came out, right? And kind of think about the happenings that were happening when this book came out. Provides historical context. So when dealing with Baldwin, and we'll be picking up Baldwin again next week, there's what I call the Baldwinian pillars of white inferiority. And you know that I use white inferiority as a supplement for white supremacy, but Baldwin articulates that there's two pillars that hold up this system of white inferiority. What is a pillar? What is a work? What does the work that pillars do? What is a pillar, and what is the work that pillars seek to do?
Is it kind of like support?
Absolutely. Yep. Exactly what it is. They hold structures up, right? They support structures. They often also some at in a way serve as foundations for buildings. Okay. So if we're thinking about the pillars that hold up this idea of white inferiority as articulated by James Baldwin, he gives us two. One of which being the white imagination, the other one being the maintenance of white innocence. So this desire, this need to maintain the innocence of whiteness, of white people. So let's unpack the first pillar, the white imagination. In my understanding, when I think about the white imagination, I think the most quintessential depiction of the white imagination can be found in Hollywood, right? Because at the end of the day, what are movies if not the imaginations of white men that are produced into film? Anybody familiar with the film Birth of a Nation? Really old film, I think 1905. It came out. So Birth of a Nation, if you take any type of film class, they typically start off with this film. It's like the first film that you'll watch. And this film is widely recognized as classic American cinema, right? And it's studied because of the camera angles that are shot, because of the lenses that are used. The film technically was a lot further advanced than the time that it came out. But the subject matter of the film, the content of the film, it's set in Reconstruction America, right? So it's post Civil War. Due to Reconstruction, Black folks are able to make it into office, so they hold political positions. Um, and they depict these Black folks in political power as lazy, as shiftless. They show them with their feet up on the desk of the Senate where they work at, right? They show them eating watermelon. They show them eating fried chicken. So this very stereotypical depiction of blackness, right? So while this is going on in the political office, on the streets of the town, black men are running rampant, raping white women in the story, in the movie. And so much so that the apex of the story, the climax of the story, a woman trying to flee rape by a black man throws herself off a cliff to save herself from rape. Interesting tidbit about the movie, they use no black characters. In fact, what they do is they get white actors and paint them in blackface to have them depict the black characters in the movie. So the woman dies because the rape, excuse me, or attempted rape, and then the Ku Klux Klan arrive on the scene to save the nation, to birth a new nation where black folks are kept in their place, right? This movie was shown in the White House. This movie went on tour throughout the East Coast. Again, this movie is widely recognized as the greatest piece of American cinema, the white imagination. Okay. Um, so this is one aspect of Baldwin. That's one pillar that Baldwin speaks of. The other pillar, the maintenance of white innocence. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Bosom John, Sandra Bland, Trayvon Martin. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. Ezell Ford, etc., etc., etc. These are all black individuals, black bodies that were stolen from this earth at the hands of the white power structure. by and large, you would recognize these deaths as homicides, right? But what happens is the murder takes place. The perpetrators of the murder, the murderers, are put in trial, right? They're put before a trial of their peers, which is very important. And they're always, for the most part, let off with a slap on the wrist. They're let off with a slap on the wrist because of a term they call justifiable homicide, right? And there's one key factor that leads to the homicide being justifiable. And they use it in every case that I've mentioned. This factor has a precedent. What is that key factor? What is it that makes the homicide justifiable? Does anyone know? The officer, the citizen, whoever the case, the perpetrator always fears for their life. And because they fear for their life, this homicide becomes justified. Okay? I want you to think about this. If you're a police officer, you're signing up to do that job. When you apply for a job, there's a job description. And in that job description, they lay out all the duties for your job to do it competently. So you choose to do it anyway, knowing what the fears, what the dangers are, right? You go through a series of training. You get weapons training. You get tactical training, right? So now you're an officer on the street. You've been trained to do this job. You know what the job entails. You know what the job requires, right? You're provided a gun, a bulletproof vest, pepper spray, handcuffs, a baton, all these things to protect yourself, right? But when it comes to a interaction with a black person, with a black body, there's a fear that takes over your body, into where all your training goes out the window. All the armor that you've been provided, all the weaponry that you've been provided, it has no consequence, and it pales in comparison to this fear that you have of this unarmed black man, black woman, or black child, right? So the imagination creates the fear through movies and through tropes and through stereotypes like The Birth of a Nation, right? And this fear is understood throughout the society because everyone watches the news and everyone sees how dangerous black people are because this is what the news promotes, right? So when it comes to a situation to where an individual is unjustly murdered by the police, the society could get it in their head that that individual is dangerous, so that justifies their unjust murder. This is how the white imagination and the maintenance of white innocence work hand in hand, right? Because the courts will come by and say that that homicide was justifiable and that individual is innocent. And they're able to walk the street, they're able to still be police officers, etc., etc., etc. Does everyone understand how the white imagination and the maintenance of white innocence works hand in hand to uphold this power structure we call white inferiority? Does anybody need me to further explain that? Because we're going to revisit this next week, so it's very important that you guys get a conceptualization of that. So let's look at how Baldwin kind of writes this white imagination and the maintenance of white innocence into the story with Jesse and the town that he's the sheriff of. Excuse me. So we know that we're dropped into Jesse's bedroom, right? This is the setting that Baldwin places in. We know that Jesse is restless, right? He's laying next to his wife. And like a typical man who can't go to sleep, he's trying to get it cracking, right? But there's something in his mind that's preventing him from being able to perform his duties in the bedroom, right? He's not able to get his man to stand to attention because something is occupying his mind. And he's trying to tell his wife about his day, and she's like, yo, just go to sleep, you know? But he still wants to kind of get this off his chest. And he thinks about the happenings of his day. He thinks about the black folks in town who are protesting to get their voting rights. And he thinks about his job as sheriff of the town to maintain law and order, which requires him to throw folks in jail, which requires him to beat folks, right? And then there's this singing that they're doing all day, all night, nonstop, this singing. So they know that if they could get the leader of the group to get everyone else to stop singing, they could control the situation. So Jesse is tasked to get the leader of the group to get everyone else to stop singing. And I found it interesting how Baldwin writes this particular scene. He says, his foot leapt out. He had not known it was going to do that. And it caught the boy flush on the jaw, right? So what happened is Jesse just kicked this kid in the face. But the way that Baldwin writes it, his foot, leaped out, right? Like he didn't have control of the foot. He didn't even know that his foot was going to do that, right? And he caught him flush in the jaw. But again, he didn't know it, right? He didn't mean to do it, maintaining his innocence. And then we read it a little lower, right? I'm sorry, on the next page. He gets to the singing, right? And this is what Ashlyn is kind of pointing this to. This is on page 235. He says, they were singing to God. They were singing for mercy. And they had hoped to go to heaven. And he had sometimes even felt, when looking into the eyes of some of the old women, a few of the very old men, that they were singing for his mercy, the mercy of his soul, for the mercy of Jesse's soul, right? And he thinks about that, and he thinks further. He says, Baldwin writes, he had never thought much about what it meant to be a good person. He tried to be a good person and treat everybody right. It wasn't his fault if the niggers had taken it into their heads to fight against God and to go against the rules laid down in the Bible for everyone to read, right? So it's not my fault that I have to do these brutal things to these black people. It's their fault. They're going against the rules that God placed in the Bible that is forcing me to kick them in the head. That's forcing me to cattle prod their genitals, right? It's not my fault. I'm innocent, okay? And then the role of Otis, Jesse's friend. And I'll read a quick passage. On page 243, he says, this is Jesse, had grown accustomed for the solution of such mysteries to go to Otis. So he has questions about what's going on, right? The town has been a little different. I ain't seen no black folks on the town. And he has questions about some racial issues, right? And typically, if he has questions about racial issues, he'll go to Otis. But he could not ask Otis about this. Anyway, he had not seen Otis for 2 days. He had not seen a black face anywhere for more than 2 days. So let me ask you this. If Jesse goes to Otis to have Otis answer his questions about things dealing with race, what does that say about Otis' understanding of racism? If Jesse goes to Otis to get an understanding about things dealing with matters of race, what does that say about Otis's understanding of racial issues?
Maybe that he's more wise.
Yeah, he's more wise as it pertains to racial relations. Now, Marjorie or anyone, why do you think that Otis would be more wise as it pertains to race than Jesse would? Why would that be?
I want to say that maybe he was older.
Okay, it could be possible. There's also a phenomenon that happens in America when a child comes of age, right? So when you get a certain age in a black household, there's a certain conversation that takes place. When you got a certain age in a white household, there's a conversation that takes place. In the white household, it's a conversation that they call the birds and the bees, right? In black households, that conversation is centered around how to interact with police, how to deal with racism, What do you do if you get called a nigger? Things of that nature, right? So you see there's two vastly different conversations that take place for youth of black and white households around the same age. For the black household, those conversations are centered around survival. I'm going to teach you about racism. I'm going to teach you about the police. So that way, when you leave my home, they will allow you to make it back at night safely, right? Your life, your very life depends on that. Has anybody heard of Emmett Till? Nobody heard the story of Emmett Till?
Yeah. It was like the lynching of like a young boy.
Mm-hmm. What happened to him?
I think like I forgot if they like found him like lynched or in like a river or something, but it was like these two white men and they were like put on court and not convicted, guilty.
So Emmett Till was a young boy. I believe he was 15, and he lived in Chicago. Oftentimes, due to the Great Migration, black families would move from the southern part of the country to the northern part of the country because they wanted to avoid the racial prejudice. There's vastly different cultures in the north and the south. Both are racist, but they do it differently. So Emmett Till, being from the north, goes to visit his family down south. He doesn't move like southern black folks move. Southern black folks don't want to look white folks in the eye, won't dare even look at a white woman, right? But Emmett Till's from the north, so he doesn't know this. So as the story goes, he looks at this white lady, just looks at her. The white lady says that he tried to rape her. They snatched Emmett Till up, drag his body on the back of a car, beat him, brutalize him, throw him in the lake. They found him in the lake, and his mother decides to have his funeral with an open casket so the world could see his mangled body. And this was like a watershed moment for American race relations. All black kids know about Emmett Till because all black parents don't want their children to end up like Emmett Till. Emmett Till is what Trayvon Martin is in the 21st century, Emmett Till was back in the day, right? It's the same parallel. So this need to have these conversations to prepare your children is something of the utmost importance in the black household, while Jesse doesn't get those conversations because his life is not predicated on him understanding racism. But he is taught racism, right? And it's done in its own way. And it's in the tradition of racism is passed down to Jesse. Anyone knows what the original term for picnic means? What is this story about? What is Baldwin writing about in this story? Where does his father take him to at the end of the story? Y'all read it, right? So what happens at the end? What does he see?
He sees he goes with his father to see a black man get lynched.
A lynching, absolutely. Thank you, Juan. So when we use this term picnic in American society, picnic literally means to pick a nigga and hang him, right? Think about it. On page 241, he says, "Is that where they got him now?" asked Jesse's father. By this time, there were 3 cars piled behind the first one, with everyone looking excited and shining, and Jesse noticed that they were carrying food. It was like a 4th of July picnic, right? So they're attending this lynching like it's a sporting event, like it's a baseball game, right? Everybody's gonna pile in their car, pack up their food, and go watch this. And he says it was like there was millions of people here to watch this. At least hundreds, right? What Baldwin says. And I find it interesting that Jesse continues to ask this question as he's watching the happenings take place. What did he do? What did he do? What did he do? In other words, This black man had to do something so egregious to deserve this type of treatment. Jesse couldn't even fabulate the fact that his father, his mother, his father and mother's friends were so savage, so inhumane, so heartless that they would just do something like this to somebody for no reason, right? But if you read closely, you know that what the man did to get lynched was he knocked over an old lady. Now, chances are, for being not from the South, but spending some time in the South, it was probably an accident, right? But that accident cost him his life. What did he do? What did he do? What did he do, right? That question also tries to maintain the innocence of Jesse's community because he had to do something to deserve this, right? And then you also get like the tradition, passing down customs. This also could almost be read as Baldwin writing white folklore, right? Think about how Jesse looks at his mom as she's watching this take place, right? He says she's never been more beautiful. Think about how Jesse said he's never loved his father more than in the moment when he's on his shoulders watching this black man be castrated and burned alive, right? And his father tells him, well, I told you, said his father, you wasn't never going to forget this picnic. His father's face was full of sweat. His eyes were very peaceful. At that moment, Jesse loved his father more than he had ever loved him. He felt that his father had carried him through a mighty test, had revealed to him a great secret which would be the key to his life forever. Okay? So again, passing down these traditions, passing down these understandings, right? And then he says, Baldwin, whatever the fire had left undone, the hands and the knives and the stones of the people had accomplished. The head was caved in, one eye was torn out, one ear was hanging, but one had to look carefully to realize this, for it was now merely a black charred object on the black charred ground, right? So what Baldwin is describing there is historically accurate. So when they had a lynching, when they went to this entertainment event, when they went to their picnics, those in attendance walked away with souvenirs, right? And he paints the scene of the man with a knife cutting off the black man's genitals, right? But then they set him on fire. But what Baldwin is saying is after the fire then burnt out, think about this. Think about the picture that he's describing, how sick these people are. You're going to literally hang someone, set that person on fire, and watch all that shit go down until the fire burns out. Do you know how long it's going to take for that fire to burn out? For you to sit there and watch that? And then after watching all that, you're going to go to this body and take a piece of a finger home, take a hand home, take an ear home, take some of the lips home. Someone's going to get the genitals, right? In fact, back in the day when they sold houses from the South and they would go through the attics and the basements and what have you, they would find body parts of those who attended lynchings and took those souvenirs home, right? This is historical American fact, right? So this is what Baldwin is getting us to think about, right? But now let's think about how the story starts. Jesse's laying in his bed. He's restless. He can't get it cracking with his wife, right? So he starts to think about all these things. And the song makes him remember this moment he had with his father, right? And as he thinks about this happening, and he thinks about what his father had revealed to him to be a great secret, which would be the key to his life forever, right? When he thought about that, then he was able to perform his manly duties, right? Then his man was able to stand to attention and get it cracking with his wife, right? So what Baldwin is also getting us to think about is the relation between power and sexual desire, right? Because when Jesse felt powerless, when the situation, the circumstance was overwhelming for Jesse, he couldn't get it in, right? But when he thought about a time where the racial dynamics were in place, when black folks knew what their place was within this town, he felt the power and he felt comfortable enough to get what he wanted to get going, right? So he's saying that there's a correlation here between sexual desire and power, right? This is what Baldwin is also pointing us to. But I think really the big thing, the big takeaway, excuse me, and Baldwin does this a lot. He's aware of how racism and systems of oppression impact those who are marginalized, right? He knows how racism affects black folks. But what he's doing through this book, through this novel, through this story, is talking about and pinpointing how racism even in fact impacts white folks. It has adverse effects to them as well, right? And no one can go through this system of racism and inhumane treatment of people and come out human, right? So I'll put my notes on pause there. We'll jump into our fishbowl. If you have not fishbowl, I definitely advise that you do so. You have to do 2 a semester. You have 1 time to pass. You could talk about your notes in your journal. You could talk about my notes that I just gave right now, or you could talk about what was discussed in your breakout room. And just because we have a small group, we'll just take 2 people to volunteer, or I'll call on just 2. Does anybody want to volunteer? All right. Marjorie, are you prepared to fishbowl today?
I've done both of
Oh, you
them.
did both of them? Okay. Thank you, Marjorie. So you're good. Arturo, are you prepared to fishbowl today?
I've done both of them too.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Arturo. Juan, are you prepared to fishbowl today?
I've completed both as well.
Thank you, Juan. Miguel, have you completed both?
No.
Are you prepared to fishbowl today?
Sure.
Okay. And then Ashlyn, have you done both fishbowls?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, okay. So Miguel, it's just gonna be you, man, because you're the only one who hasn't fishbowl. Is this your first one, or this would be your second, Miguel?
My second one.
Okay, so
Oh no, I haven't done any of them.
So you'll have one more after this. So again, man, just anything from your notes, anything from your breakout room conversation, or anything that was mentioned by me is on the table.
So I'll go with my notes. I didn't get to read all of it. I only read the first little section.
Okay.
But what I wrote was, in the first part, I believe Jesse, when he was with his wife trying to initiate intercourse, he couldn't get it up because he was feeling remorse and confusion. But obviously, after listening to your notes, that's not the point, or that's not the case.
Yeah.
And that he feels remorse and confusion. The remorse being for what he did to the black man when he prodded his testicles in the I believe the jailhouse or whatever it was.
Uh-huh.
And and the confusion being because he didn't understand what the meaning of the song was until later, when more or less it was begging for forgiveness for Jesse for what he has done, condemning him to hell, kind of.
Yeah.
Or that's what I got.
Yeah. I mean, you weren't too far off. Let me ask you this, Miguel. Now that you've heard the notes, what do you think really kept him from being able to perform that act with his wife?
I don't know. The influx of info, it's everything you said, it's I've been shown something that I've never looked at. I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's all this info is just,
yeah, it's
not too much. It's just all new things I haven't heard before.
Yeah, it's a lot, and I think too, especially the subject matter of this particular reading is a lot to digest. Also, that's why I said last week, trigger warning, this is some sticky shit that we about to get into. But it's American history, right? And it's part of American history that they want to foreclose and forget about, and that's why they're trying not to have things like critical race theory being taught in school, so these type of stories don't get told, right? And again, this goes back to what I'm saying. Far as the maintenance of white innocence, right? I'm going to remain innocent if I remove all the stories that make me seem guilty, right? And this is part of this apparatus of power that tries to keep them in the situation that they're at, which is on the top of the social ladder. Any other thoughts about the reading, or any questions you had about the reading?
No?
And Miguel, you're good. You did your fishbowl. This is more addressed to the class.
All right.
Does anyone else have any questions about the reading? Any thoughts about the reading? Anything else that stood out to them? Juan, what did you find interesting from either the reading or from the conversation today?
What I found interesting most about this reading was similar to Arturo. Is that who did the fishbowl? I think so, right?
Miguel.
Oh, Miguel. Okay. So yeah, the same thing about him when he couldn't get an erection with his wife, and then at the end of the story, he was able to do that. I think going back to your question that you posed to him, I think it was because he was remembering all of the trauma that he's gone through, I guess, or all the trauma he's caused to others, that he wasn't able to, I guess, complete his job.
Okay. Does anybody agree with Juan's assessment? Does anybody feel that's the same thing? Like Marjorie, Arturo, Ashlyn, do you feel also that's what was preventing him from getting that going? Yes, no, kinda.
Yes, but I also think, well, I don't know. I'm not sure, but I think that maybe there was more things.
Like what do you think, Marjorie? If you could just guess, there's no wrong answer. Just curious. Because you're right. You're right. So let's go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Marjorie. I'm listening.
I was just gonna say, like, nothing's coming to my head right now.
Okay, no worries. So a couple of things that kind of point you in the right way, in the right direction. One second, y'all. I'm gonna find this. So here's a little. So he lay there, and he sighed. The image of a black girl caused a distant excitement in him, like a faraway light. But again, the excitement was more like pain. Instead of forcing him to act, it made the action impossible. Okay, so just keep that in the back of your mind, right? There's another part where he talks about. Hold on. Okay, here we go. So he says, sometimes, sure, like any other man, he knew that if he wanted a little more spice than Grace could give him, and he would drive over yonder and pick up a black piece or arrest her, it came to the same thing. But he couldn't do that now. No more. There was no telling what may happen once your ass was up in the air, and they were low enough to kill a man then, too. Every one of them, or the girl herself, might do it, right while she was making believe you made her feel good. So he can't do it, right? So he starts to think about all the black women who he would call it what it is, rape, right? And he said he thought about a little black piece, he got almost a little feeling in his stomach, and then it went away and it made it impossible. And he says, and he talks about how much he loves his wife, but like any other man, I want a little something different. And when I wanted something different, I'll go to the black side of town and rape a black woman, right? I would arrest her, have my way with her. But now I can't do that because there's protests, they're in an uproar, and if I'm caught with my pants down, they may use this opportunity to kill me, right? So what's going on? He's not able to perform because the order in the city is not where it needs to be, right? The black folks are protesting. The black folks are causing disturbances, right? So all these things are causing Jesse not to have ease, okay? And he's still thinking about what's going on throughout his day, right? He recounts the actions of the day, and then the song comes into his head. I gone to the river at Jordan. The water was to my knees, right? He's like, man, where did I hear that from? Why do I know that? And I know that how they're singing it now, the lyrics are a little bit different. I went to the river at Jordan. The water came to my waist. He's like, man, where am I hearing? Where do I hear that from? I went to the river at Jordan. The water came to my head, right? And when he gets that part of the song, it makes him remember when he was a kid and his father took him to his first lynching, right? And he talks about how back in the day, the black folks knew their place in town. Back in the day when his father and his father's friends ran the town, the issues that they're facing now would not take place, right? Then he starts to feel a little bit more comfortable. Once he fully recalls the picnic, once he fully recalls the lynching, in his mind, the power dynamics have been situated. They're back in their place. And once that's been established, that allows him to get that erection, right? So it's not about his guilt. It's not about him kicking old boy in the face. Not about him prodding the genitals of the young black man. That's not his problem. Because he's doing God's work. His innocence is maintained. He's okay with that. He has to do that because they're not acting right. So that's not his problem. He's not guilty about that, right? What he's upset about is the lack of power dynamics that his community has, right? Because when he talks about, man, if things were segregated like they were in the North, we would just go and bomb that whole city down. And we didn't have to worry about this no more. But now that the way that the city is constructed, we can't do that. Because if we do one part of town, they're going to hear about it on the other part of town and it's on, right? So his angst is around the lack of power, the lack of control that they have over the black population in the city. That's why he can't get an erection. And once in his mind he has that situated, once he has rectified that problem by recalling a lynching, the blood is flowing. Literally and figuratively, if y'all get my drift. So that is the reason why. Does that make sense to y'all? Do you get why I made, where the distinction is between that? Does that make sense for you, Juan?
Yes, I actually agree with you now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. But I just wanted you guys to make sure that was not missed. Because another thing with Baldwin, he very much explores the intersections of sexuality, the intersections of power, the intersections of race, that all comes to the fore. This idea of desire is a very core component for Baldwin. So let me show you guys.